Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 14th of May of 2026. Today we have a lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the conflict on the territory of Ukraine, where the Russians during the previous 48 hours have launched the biggest massive attack since the beginning of the special military operation. The Minister of Defense of Ukraine this morning stated, once again, let's discuss this number, that by the morning of the 14th of May of 2026, the Russians used 1,623 drones and missiles altogether. The Russians attacked almost every single square kilometer of the territory of Ukraine. We have this map where we can see the common picture of the situation in Ukraine between the morning of the 13th of May till the evening of the 14th of May of 2026. As you can see, lots of explosions through the western parts of Ukraine, lots of explosions in the area of the city of Kiev, and of course lots of explosions along the line of combat contact. We need to understand that this Russian massive attack had several purposes and several tasks. First of all, of course, to show the Ukrainians and to show the Ukrainians the Russian possibilities, capabilities. This is the first thing. The second thing is to force the Ukrainian side to accept the Russia's demands and to begin the real negotiation process with the Russian Federation. And of course, to withdraw troops from the rest of Donbass, which can start the negotiation process itself. But we know that as of the end of the 14th of May of 2026, the President of Ukraine, Zelensky, rejected the Russia's proposals regarding ceasefire, regarding the withdrawal of troops, but he decided to order his special forces to prepare a retaliatory strike, and most likely in coming days, the Ukrainians will strike back. I'm not sure whether the Ukrainians are able to carry out massive attacks during the upcoming night between the 14th and the 15th of May of 2026, because it seems that the Russians during the previous 24 hours deal significant damage to the Ukrainians and to their warehouses, ammo depots, on their drones facilities. And for example, today we received the report that the Russians, as a result of attack in the northwestern parts of the city of Kiev, managed to damage and to destroy an office that was a headquarters of a factory that produces drones that Ukrainians use to attack deep inside of the territory of Russia. So, summarizing everything, we think that Ukrainians indeed suffered huge losses during the previous 24 hours, and from these perspectives, most likely the Ukrainians are not able to strike back during the upcoming night. They need to concentrate forces, they need to accumulate drones, and only then they will attack deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation. But the most important thing is that the President of Ukraine, Zelensky, stated that he asked his special forces, special services, to prepare not a massive counterattack, massive counter-strike on the territory of the Russian Federation. He was asking about special operation, which means that in coming days we might see some special operations carried by the Ukrainians. Maybe some cars will explode, maybe something else, but we'll see something on the territory of Russia. Maybe not a single thing, but maybe several explosions, several attacks would be carried out by the Ukrainians. And the third and the most important thing why the Russians were attacking the territory of Ukraine during the previous 24 hours is that the Russians understand that most likely they will be forced to finish the conflict on the territory of Ukraine and to get their demands, and to force the Ukrainians to accept the Russia's demands only using military means. Most likely the Russians realized this, so that is why basically this massive attack was something like rocket drone preparation before the beginning of major offensives along the entire line of combat contact. And for example, as of the 14th of May of 2026, we received lots of very interesting updates on this matter. So let's discuss the situation on the ground, and let's try to understand where exactly the Russians are beginning their major offensives. And first, let's talk about the Sumy direction. During the previous 24 hours, lots of videos were published from the settlement by the name of Khotin. In the eastern parts of the settlement, we can see a Russian drone that was attacking positions of the armored forces of Ukraine through the eastern parts of the settlement. So nothing special, but as of the northwestern parts parts of the settlement. Here we can see how the Russians were bombing temporary deployment points of the armored forces of Ukraine with FABs. As a result of attack, the northern temporary deployment point most likely was destroyed. So it seems that in coming days, the Russians will begin offensive operation in the direction of the city of Khotyn from the north through the settlement of Kondratovka, and from the northeast through the settlement of Pisarevka from the area of the village of Mala Karchakovka. So most likely in coming days, the Russians would try to establish complete control or to answer the settlement of Khotyn with the purpose to take under complete control all these territories and to improve positions right in front of the city of Sumy in the Sumy agglomeration. Few more explosions and strikes were recorded along the Kharkiv direction. One of the explosions was recorded on the territory of the city by the name of Velika Pisarevka. In this video, we can see the settlement of Velika Pisarevka. The Russians discovered positions of the FPV drone operators of the armored forces of Ukraine, and then the Russians attacked them. The second attack took place in the area of the settlement of Khotyn. So it seems that the Russians may try to improve their positions in this area in coming days. As for the Kharkiv and the Kupiansk directions, during the previous 12 hours we haven't received anything, which means that most likely these directions are not going to be primary directions for the Russians for coming weeks. Now let's discuss the situation in the Druzhkivka, Slaviansk, Konstantinovka, Kramatorsk direction. We have lots of very interesting updates, and these updates tells us that most likely the Russians are going to intensify their offensive operation in this area in coming days. First of all, we have changes on the ground, and the changes are coming from the area around the settlement of Alexandrovka. This video was published by pro-Ukrainian sources, and here we can see how the Russians were securing trenches and strongholds, former strongholds of the armored forces of Ukraine, and as a result of attack, the Russians improved their positions right in front of the settlement of Alexandrovka. Currently, the distance to the village is around 1 kilometer, but telling the truth, I believe that currently the clashes are already taking place on the territory of the settlement. Today, for example, several pro-Russian sources stated that as of the end of the 14th of May of 2026, the Russians controlled up to 40% of the settlement of Alexandrovka, and the Russians continue advancing further and continue improving their positions significantly. So maybe this is something like the current situation in this area. The Russians are pushing forward and the Ukrainians are retreating towards the northwestern and the western parts of the settlement. At the same time, a bit further to the east, we have several videos published by pro-Russian sources where we can see how the Russians were raising their flags through the settlements of Kaleniki and Riznikovka. This is another proof, another evidence that the Russians indeed, as a result of clashes, established complete control over these two villages, and the Russians are ready to move further. The most important update from this area this morning was published by a pro-Ukrainian source, and we have a very interesting map updates in the area of the settlement of Tikhonovka, and these are the changes on the ground between the dates. This is the end of the 13th of May of 2026, and this is the end of the 14th of May of 2026. According to this report, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to break through Ukraine's defense along the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal and to answer the village of Tikhonovka from the east. At the same time, the Russians intensified their artillery strikes through the villages around the area. So once again, these are the changes, and it seems that the Russians managed to establish complete control over the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal, and now the Russians are sending troops, infantry, sabotage and reconnaissance groups along this tree line with the purpose to answer the settlement of Tikhonovka from the east and to dig in deeper. So maybe this is the beginning of something bigger than just attack on another village, because this attack is taking place on the Ukrainian side of the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal, and this is if Russians are able to take under complete control these territories, this can lead to complete collapse of the inside defense line of the armored forces of Ukraine to the east of the city of Konstantinovka. Currently, the Russians, as we can see, are trying to take under complete control these territories along the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal, and if it happens, the distance between the Russian positions and the city of Kramatorsk itself would be less than 9 kilometers, which is already nothing when talking about battle for the final Donbas Arc operation target. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Konstantinovka direction, where the situation continues deteriorating for the armed forces of Ukraine. During the previous days, the Russians bombed and destroyed several temporary deployment points of the armed forces of Ukraine through the settlement of Druzhkivka, but the most important update is coming from the area between the cities of Chasiv Yar and Konstantinovka. Today, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation stated that as a result of clashes, the armed forces of the Russian Federation of the group of forces south managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Nikolaivka. And these are the changes on the ground according to the Minister of Defense of Russia. And these are the changes on the ground between the previous several days. So this is the end of the 12th of May. And if you remember, just yesterday we discussed that the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly in the southeastern parts of the settlement of Molocharka, and it seems that the village was taken by Russians, but the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will report about this in coming days. So most likely this is the current situation on the ground, including this settlement. All these territories are under complete Russian control, and it seems that when the Russians established control over these territories, the Ukrainians in the pockets between the villages of cities of Konstantinovka and Chasiv Yar felt themselves completely uncomfortable. So we are talking about these territories, and Ukrainians most likely realize that if they stay in the villages like Nikolaivka, Chervona, Podolska, then there are very high chances that the Russians would caught them in cauldron. So that is why the Ukrainians withdrew their positions from the territory of Nikolaivka, and the Russians took these positions immediately right after the Ukrainians left this area. So these are the changes on the ground, and this is the situation in this area. Most likely in coming days, the Russians will finish the battle for two more villages in this area. We are talking about the settlements of Podolska and Chervona, and control over these villages will allow the Russians to establish and to maintain the lines through the Chasiv Yar-Konstantinovka line. We're talking about these territories, and of course, if it happens, the Russians will improve their logistics significantly. The Russians will be able to continue offensive operation further using this foothold right in the direction of the settlement of Druzhkivka, and this could be something completely unexpected for the armed forces of Ukraine, because it seems that the Russians are trying to outsmart the Ukrainians, and it seems that the Russians are trying to move through the final battle, not as the Ukrainians got used to during the previous battles, like for the cities of Bakhmut, Toretsk, and many other towns. The Russians are not planning to finish the battle for the city of Konstantinovka. Let's say right now, immediately, the Russians, it seems, are trying to outflank and outmaneuver the Ukrainians to the north of the city, and even probably to enter the settlement of Druzhkivka from the east, even before the end of the battle for the city of Konstantinovka. Because if Russians are able to do something like this, obviously the situation for the Ukrainians would become immediately critical. But most likely the Ukrainians will not allow this to happen. They will basically retreat before it happens. Otherwise, they would be caught by the Russians in cauldron. Meanwhile, the Russians continue bombing and attacking positions of the armed forces of Ukraine through the northwestern parts of the city of Konstantinovka. Lots of FAPs, lots of explosions were recorded, but as we can see, the Ukrainians are still holding their lines. But we see that small collapse happened to the east of the Druzhkivka-Konstantinovka agglomeration. Once again, we're talking about Russian control over the settlement of Nikolaivka. As for the Dobropolye direction, the most important update from this area is coming from the territory of the settlement of Novopidgorodnya. During the previous day, additional changes on the ground were recorded. This information was published by very reliable pro-Russian sources, and according to these updates, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to improve their positions significantly through the western parts of the settlement, and now the Ukrainians control or have strong control over just northwestern parts, but it seems that under such a pressure, the Ukrainians in coming days would be forced to fall back in the direction of the settlements of Raipolye or Kolona Mizhova. And now let's discuss the situation in the Zaporozhye direction. During the previous 24 hours, we haven't received almost anything from this area. Both the Russians and the Ukrainians attack each other, but currently the Ukrainians have problems because the Russians during the previous 2 days, during the biggest massive attack that started on the 13th of May of 2026. The Russians dealt significant damage to positions and temporary deployment points of the armed forces of Ukraine through the city of Zaporozhye and its industrial zones, which means that most likely the Ukrainians currently suffer problems with logistics and so on. So that is why we don't have anything from this area. Meanwhile, the Russians continue their regrouping through the western Zaporozhye direction with the purpose then to move further in the northern direction and to attack and to recapture positions the Russians lost during the Ukraine's January, February and March counteroffensive operations. As for the Kherson direction, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special. The most important thing that the situation will continue deteriorating for the armed forces of Ukraine due to these massive attacks. Obviously, the strike that took place between the 13th and the 14th of May of 2026 is not going to be the last attack from the Russian side. We believe that the Russians right now will try to intensify the number of attacks, and most likely in 2-3 days the Russians will repeat. Now the Russians most likely will try to shorten the distance between massive attacks. When talking about the period of time between January and May of 2026, usually it took 10 days before another massive attack, but now the Russians most likely will try to reduce the number of days till 6 or 5 days between massive attacks. And if it happens, if the Russians are able to support such a pressure, most likely several front lines of the armed forces of Ukraine could collapse under such a pressure. We have covered most of the updates regarding the conflict on the territory of Ukraine. We see that most likely it's time for talks, for negotiations. The United States of America can once again become a mediator in this process. The Russians stated that Europeans cannot act as mediators in negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. They are directly involved in the war on the side of Kiev and are proponents of the idea of delivering a crushing blow to Russia. At the same time, Marco Rubio, Secretary of State of the United States of America, made a statement that the moment of negotiations has been lost, but the United States is ready to become a mediator between Ukraine and Russia again, according to the US Secretary of State. In recent months, the negotiation process has slowed down, with both sides focusing on the situation on the front lines and economic factors. Ukrainians have survived the winter and are becoming more confident on the battlefield, while Russians are experiencing a certain level of optimism due to increase in oil prices. So this is the statement of the Secretary of State, and according to the statement, we see that neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians are ready for negotiation process and for ending of the conflict. Now let's discuss the situation in China. During the previous 24 hours, a meeting between the President of the United States of America and the President of China took place. And probably this is the most important moment of this meeting, and this is the moment when the President of the United States of America made his biggest mistake. You know that this is a famous handshake of the President of the United States of America. While shaking the hand, he's trying to pull a person in his direction. And this is something that President Trump does always during his trips, meetings and visits and so on. But this is not something that the President of the United States of America can do with the Chinese leader. And as you can see, according to this moment, according just to this picture, the President of the United States of America managed to pull the hand of the President Xi in his direction, which was obviously something very aggressive. And later, second after President Xi, she was trying to restore the situation in the middle, but the next thing is President Trump made some slaps on the hand of President Xi, and this is also not something good in this situation. And right after this moment, we start receiving lots of protocol updates about meetings, about statements. The President of the United States of America was telling lots of very pleasant things to the President of China. You are a great leader. I say it to everybody that you are a great leader. Sometimes people don't like me saying it, but I say it anyway because it's true. And the president of the United States of America brought his richest and heads of richest people and his leaders and heads of different main organizations of the United States of America. The question is, why was he doing this? But the most important thing, that's right after this meeting, of course, the president of China and the president of the United States of America made lots of pleasant statements to each other, but the most important thing that is, we can say that the talks collapsed completely, because it seems that after the negotiation process, nothing was signed. The only thing is that Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, stated that the Chinese side said they are not in favor of militarizing the Strait of Hormuz or a tolling system, and that's our position. So as you can see, the only thing that the American side managed to get from this meeting is to receive a verbal confirmation from the Chinese side that they're against militarization of the Strait of Hormuz and they're against a tolling system. And that's it. Nothing was signed, nothing was agreed upon, nothing was made. The United States of America is returning back from China with nothing. Yes, we had a report that the president of the United States of America managed to get a deal when he will be able to increase trade with some agricultural production products with China, but telling the truth, this is nothing. He brought his artificial intelligence giants of the United States of America, and the only thing he managed to do is to sign a deal when China will buy more meat from the United States of America. So this is a total collapse of the negotiation process. Most likely in coming days we'll see this further development of the situation in Iran, with Iran and with the Strait of Hormuz, and most likely Iran will be backed both by Russia and the United and China. And that's it for today. The Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.